Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Oh, Mark, it's so good to have you back on the podcast. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Carey. Good to hang out again.
Hang out, catch up. So we got to get updated. I have had a chance to interview you on my other podcast, Church Pulse Weekly. And we talked a little bit about some of the big changes in 2020 if people want to go and check that out. But I'd love to give listeners of this show just the overview. Man, it's been a year like nobody called, man. What has been the biggest impact on Mark Batterson and on National Community Church?
Yeah, who would have thought that COVID, as challenging as it is, wouldn't even be the biggest challenge that we're facing, at least not pastoring a church in Washington, D.C. Honestly, right now, it's the political polarization that we feel kind of ripping at the seams, and being 5 blocks from the Supreme Court and a mile from the Capitol, a little bit further to the White House. You know, we're feeling it. How do we function as a nonpartisan church that reaches lots of people on both sides of the aisle? It's getting harder and harder because, Carey, and it's not just the cancel culture piece. Yeah, there's so many litmus tests. There's a litmus test for
what do you mean, like
everything. Well, for example, president gets COVID. Do you pray or not pray in your service? Yeah. People will leave one way or the other.
Really? So if you don't pray, people will walk out. If you pray, people will walk out.
Yeah. In some ways, it feels like a little bit of a no-win. And I'm an eternal optimist.
I was going to say, you're not a divisive personality at all. Like, no way.
Well, and I will right up front say, Proverbs 26, 2 and 3 is a key leadership principle for me. It says, rebuke a fool or he'll seem wise in his own eyes. And then the very next verse, it says, do not rebuke a fool. Carey, here's the deal. If you're dealing with foolishness, you can't win. You can't win one way or the other. And so sometimes as a leader, you need to recognize that, well, you can please all the people some of the time, some of the people all the time, but you can't please all the people all the time. So I tell our staff, hey, it all goes back to the bell curve. No matter what, there are going to be 16% of people who are resistors or laggards. I don't care if you're Moses coming down Mount Sinai with 2 stone tablets. So there we are with a running start. And I would add, it's the racial tension. Now, we've lived in that space for a long time. We have a very multicultural church, but we've discovered we have to take it to another level. And so we formed a multicultural team. It's one of our 3 wins. What's important now on our strat ops for 2021. And we've hired consultation help. And we've realized it's something you have to disciple. If you're going to experience racial unity, you have to disciple. It cannot be a sermon when a news event happens. It's got to be a long-term strategy. And then throw in the fact that theaters, five of our campuses meet in theaters, and news came out that theaters are going to close indefinitely. We're not sure when or how they're going to reopen.
Are some of those Regal theaters like while we're?
Yep.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So here we are with higher levels of uncertainty than we've ever experienced, more tension than we've ever experienced. And I always go back to this story in Exodus. Moses is stuck between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea. And I love this verse. Do not panic. Do not panic. Stand still and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. Carey, I'm believing that for leaders right now, that this is our moment to stay calm and carry on. This is our moment to believe by faith that the best is yet to come. We're here for such a time as this. Those are not just empty biblical cliches. Those are the facts, folks, that if this is the gap that we are called to stand in, and this is when leaders lead.
I got to ask you, I mean, there's so many questions even in that. And I want to talk about sort of the new work that you're releasing, which I'm really excited about. But people say, is it worse now than it was? So you've been in the Capitol for 25 years. How has partisanship intensified over that quarter century?
It really has. Yeah. It's visceral.
It's not our imagination. It's not the media. It's just worse.
No, I'll give you one anecdote. 4 years ago, when President Trump was inaugurated, our coffee house is, again, just a few blocks from the Capitol. So as you can imagine, on Inauguration Day, we do killer business. I mean, it's like a banner day. It was very interesting that the day of the inauguration, we had all kinds of, make America great again hats, walking through. The very next day, there were protests. And we had another banner day. Basically, Carey, we will serve anyone coffee. But we quickly discovered that, okay, this is escalating in a unique way. And, tone, so much of leadership is EQ. It's emotional intelligence. It's being a peacemaker, a grace giver, a tone setter. It's the posture that you strike. Yeah. And right now, issues aren't even being debated. Really, it's about personalities clashing. And I'm being more blunt than I normally am.
No. But I mean, you've sat through the Clinton years, the Bush years. Was Clinton president when you started a church?
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm that old.
So Clinton, Bush, Obama, and now Trump. You've been through 4 sitting presidents, and you've definitely seen, because I mean, we've all seen it, but literally, and if you've ever been to NCC, Mark is not exaggerating. They are a few minutes walk from the Capitol building. You can see it from Barracks Row. I mean, you look down the street, there's the U.S. Capitol, and just down the road from the Supreme Court, not that far from the White House. How are you handling that as a staff? What are you saying about bringing unity where there is so much division?
Yeah, I'll give you one example. Average person spends 142 minutes on social media. That's 2 hours and 22 minutes, which represents 15% of our waking time.
Wow.
So, Carey, is that something we need to steward? Is that something we need to coach and train and really be good at? I'm asking, that's kind of, I guess, a rhetorical question that, and I realized we hadn't done much of that. And yet so much of the social media, I think, unfortunately, it can advocate for a just cause. And I think that's a positive. Yeah. And it can be a tremendous platform. Unfortunately, all too often, it's so easy to hide behind your @ sign. And it actually contributes to that polarization. And you say things that you wouldn't say in person. And so all of that to say this, like we're coaching our team a little bit more. How do we engage in that space? How do we represent Christ? How do you take a proverb like a gentle answer turns away wrath? How do you take that and apply it to social media? And then how do we reach across the aisle that is a much further debate? So when we talk about standing in the gap, if you're trying to straddle it, it's getting further and further apart. I mean, it feels like we're doing the splits some days.
How do you preach to a truly bipartisan church? Or tripartisan, quadpartisan, you probably have independents, you have socialists, you've got some libertarians in the mix, as well as Democrats and Republicans. Because if you're really reaching the city, the culture, wherever you happen to be, that's what you're going to get. You're never going to get a uniform congregation. So how do you preach in that kind of tension, particularly when you're near the epicenter?
Yeah, I think I like to think of it as flipping the coin, that everything is two-sided. Job 11:6 says true wisdom has two sides. So truth is found in the tension of opposites. And so if you only identify with every single plank of one party, I don't know. Are you thoughtfully and prayerfully looking at every single issue? And so to me, God has given us binocular vision. It's the ability to take the image from two eyes and see a combined image. I think so much of leadership is that. It's seeing both sides of it. And that takes a little bit of patience. It means you have to suspend your judgment. Sometimes you have to do a lot of listening. And you can still hold to your conviction, but you at least have to have an understanding and an appreciation for what the other side is saying, no matter what that other side is or what the issue is. And so we're living in the tension. It's of course Andy Stanley. There are problems to solve, tensions to manage. There are more and more tensions to manage, but I also think these are the growth points. These are where I know a lot of leaders are discouraged, frustrated, and I would be the first person to say, leaders aren't exempt. We're in that 1/3 of Americans that are probably experiencing anxiety and depression. In fact, our percentages might be higher because
I think you are probably right on that.
Right. So, but I would also say God is cultivating emotional strength in you. He is working out your emotional muscles. You are going to be a better leader when we come out the other side of this than you were going in. Everybody, Carey, every leader I know is getting a master's degree in crisis leadership.
Yeah.
None of us enrolled in it. We didn't enroll. We don't even really want the credit.
No,
but listen,
it's like I'm happy for this degree to be over. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer to this question, but I would imagine being, a lot of the people who go to your church have jobs on the Hill. And those jobs change every 4 years, but you've got some Democrats and Republicans. Do you get pressure from some of the people in your church or various constituencies to take a more definitive stand on issues? And if so, how do you deal with that kind of pressure? Or maybe it's just not a factor.
No, I mean, we feel that pressure. It's amazing how many emails I get from two different kind of political angles often.
Right.
And I understand that. I appreciate it.
Mark, I wish you would be more X, or why doesn't our church take a stand on Y? Those kinds of emails?
Yeah. And Carey, for some people, it will never be enough. And for others, it will always be too much. Right? On every single issue. Yeah. And so when we say nonpartisan, what we mean by that is not that we don't engage in the political sphere. Listen, we honor the system of government that we have, and we believe that we ought to be engaged. Now, we better understand that our primary citizenship is in the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. And so we actually function as ambassadors to this earthly kingdom. And our ultimate hope is not in a political system. Listen, the kingdoms of this world are becoming the kingdom of our God and of his Christ. If we read the end of the book, we know that.
We know where it
so
goes.
We honor the process. We honor people who are engaged in that sphere, but we do not endorse party or candidate. We can't do it. It's not who we are because of the space that we live in, and that's not easy. It's not easy.
So I write you an email or corner you on a Sunday morning. Mark, you need to take a position on the Supreme Court, abortion, or even how you do masks in your church at NCC if you were to reopen or have physical gatherings, that kind of thing. And I'm pushing you, And I'm saying you need to be more, vocal on those things. How do you address me?
That's a great question. Bring me back to that one, but let me start with this one.
Yeah.
A major issue is immigration policy.
Okay. Yeah.
During this particular presidency, and I've really listened to both sides of that, and have some thoughts, even some personal convictions. We decided we're not going to engage, we're not going to sign onto a piece of policy and try to get that passed. But we do resettle 65% of the refugees in the DC metro area.
Wow.
So in other words, we aren't the one making the laws per se. I'm not saying that you can't advocate for justice or something, that a cause that you believe in. We've just made the decision. We want to be more known for what we're for than what we're against. And so, hey, Scripture says, let's care for the stranger, the alien, the marginalized, the poor. And one category are those who are resettling to this country. And so we made a decision. We believe it is our biblical imperative to care for the refugee. And so that would be one way that we want our actions to speak louder than our words.
This is just something we do regardless of who happens to be in office.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that is fair. Now, I do think that we're going to have to get a little bit more nuanced as it relates. Our theology is being deconstructed and reconstructed, and that's true of every generation. But I think we're going to have a more robust theology of politics, a robust theology of sexuality. I mean, I'm not saying anything we don't know.
Yeah.
And so this is, we are in a day and age where more and more we are counterculture, and there is a little play on words here. I don't think we're the moral majority anymore, and that's not a.
I get it. It's not a slam. There's a question about whether we were back in 1985 either, or 88 or whenever that was. Yeah.
Right. And so I think we need the courage to, if we have to choose between biblical correctness and political correctness, we've got to choose biblical correctness. But I think we have to do it going back to that kind of binocular vision, not in a binary way that is A or B. Jesus was so good at finding the C, if you will. It's John 9, right, where he said, hey, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus said, wrong and wrong. This happened so that the glory of God could be revealed. And so often we resort to this binary thinking, and that contributes to the polarization instead of really being thoughtful and flipping the coin and trying to see both sides.
Well, it's interesting because I have talked to a number of leaders this year in this hyperpolarized culture who have had listen, if you talk about race again in the pulpit, we're going to pull our giving, or we're going to leave. They've got pressure from a board member. They've got pressure from a top donor. And so back to that hypothetical where you're getting the email, you're getting pigeonholed in, the lobby, and somebody asks you, Mark, you really need to take a stand on, or you need to address X. What would you typically say if it's a place you're not going to go? Because I understand, listen, I've spent most of my ministry not going to highly divisive partisan issues. I just don't do it. So how would you respond?
Well, if we're talking specifically about racism, individual or even systemic, I do think I've realized that I've had to go through a little bit of a growth process. I felt like the Lord said to me several months ago, put your pride and prejudice on the altar, be unoffendable, and listen and learn and lean in. And so as it relates to that, I think there have been a time or two that I've been guilty of the sin of silence. Now, having said that, Carey, we have to be nuanced in our understanding. And I'll just give one example.
Yeah.
Critical race theory. the second I say that, it's going to trigger lots of different reactions in people who are listening, and people wondering what my thought is on it. My point is this: hashtags aren't going to get us where we need to go. Here's the problem. Some people are more evangelistic when it comes to their political ideology than it does their biblical theology.
Yeah.
And so what I'm advocating is we've got to have a rock solid theology. You've got to understand, you've got to have a theology of dignity, that we are created in the image of God, all of us. You've got to understand that every nation, tribe, people, language will surround the throne of God. Book of Revelation. We've got to know history. We've got to know prophecy. Carey, I think it's almost like our hand got called and we were holding a bunch of face cards without we didn't have much of a hand, that we're being forced to really become better thinkers and really process things as leaders, so that because it's that theology that ultimately is going to lay the foundation for how we believe, how we act, and the convictions that we are sold out to. And so that was a long answer to a short question.
It's this is, you're echoing some thoughts that I've had in my own mind, that our theology is not up to the task right now. And I'm not talking about the historic theology of the church. I'm talking about the ability of the current generation, myself included, to articulate it, to own it, to I was watching a documentary on social media recently. A lot of people would have seen it, The Social Dilemma. And I'm like, they didn't interview a single philosopher or theologian. And I know if that had been done a generation ago, they would have. And I don't know who would speak into that right now, which is a little bit terrifying. And I love where you're going with this by saying, leaders, you need to be deeper on that stuff. So racism would be an example where you did take a stand and you formed that team that you talked about to work on. And then there are other issues that you're not going to touch with a 10-foot pole, right? Where you're like, yeah, we're not going there. That's a party platform position, not a gospel issue. And I guess, and I'll ask it one more time and then we'll let it go. But like, how do you tell the person who's badgering you to speak or be silent that you're not going to meet their need? Because sometimes you are going to speak and sometimes you're going to be silent when they want you to speak. And I'm not talking about racism here. I'm just talking about, like, if someone says, no, you can't talk about race from the platform, you're like, actually, I can, and I'm going to. And then, but I'm not going to address this subject that this other person is really passionate about. Because I've gotten those letters too. It's like, back when I was a pastor, it's like, the Supreme Court is ruling on X. You need to intervene. You're a former lawyer. You need to do this. And I was like, nope. I just want to know how you would handle that stuff.
Yeah.
How do you disappoint people is really the question, Mark.
Well, that's funny because I'm sitting in a counseling session about a year ago, Carey.
Yeah.
And I say to my counselor, I don't want to disappoint anyone ever. and he turns to me and says, well, Mark, that's quite a burden to bear. And then he says, it seems to me like Jesus disappointed people all the time. drop the mic. Carey, I'm getting better at disappointing people. And part of it is because it's just the flurry of emails that I'm getting. At the end of the day, if you live off of compliments, you'll die by criticism. And so I have to take my cues from Holy Scripture and the Holy Spirit. And at the end of the day, that's who I'm going to be accountable to for my preaching, for my teaching, for my writing.
Yeah.
And so,
so is it a polite decline? Like, hey, thanks so much, Carey. Really appreciate your comments. I'm taking it into consideration, or that's not something we're going to be addressing at any time in the future, like something like that?
Yeah, I've learned a couple of lessons there. I used to give kind of that form letter response, kind of let me see what I can do sort of response,
buying
time
promise?
or
yeah.
Yep, the false promise. and people pleasers, false promises are our second language. And so, but you know what I realized, that always doubles back. It always circles back, and it never works out.
Right. And it's like,
so you might as well just be upfront, because if you think, and you can't be afraid to lose people over these things. And so I've learned that I try to discern the spirit of the email or letter or even the verbal that I'm getting. Good. I try to perceive the spirit first. And if it's spoken in grace, I really try to receive it, listen to it. And even if it's something that I don't agree with, I found that it often refines my vision casting, sometimes my thinking process. And so I see it as a gift if someone comes to me with a really humble, gracious spirit and pushes on me a little bit. Come on, bring it on. That's how we grow. But then occasionally you get those that are just feel awfully unsanctified. And as a pastor, I feel like my job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Yeah. And so sometimes I'll flip the script, and I will push back a little bit if I perceive that the thinking is off or the spirit's wrong. I'm not doing them any favor if I'm not pastoring them in that moment, and that can be on the range from exhortation to rebuke. And so I'm trying to grow a little bit in this category of radical candor.
Well, thank you for letting me cross-examine you on that. That was so helpful. You know why? Because I think a lot of times, Mark, a lot of people have read your books, and it's amazing what God has done through your ministry. And we think, well, I guess you get to the Mark Batterson level, you just don't struggle with that anymore. And it's not true, is it?
It is not true, Carey. The blessings of God will complicate your life. That's the way I like to say it. Sin will complicate your life in a way it shouldn't be complicated. Blessings will complicate your life in a way it should be complicated. And I might even extrapolate on that, because this is such an important mindset for leaders, because we want it to get easier. It's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder, but you're going to get better and stronger and wiser. And so when Laura and I got married, it complicated my life. Praise God. We have 3 complications: Parker, Summer, and Josiah. I can't imagine my life without those complications. 7 campuses, Carey. It's a lot more complicated than when we were one church with one campus, when we were 19 people. 19 people was the least complicated church I ever pastored. Do I want to go back there? No, I don't. So bring on the complication. I think leaders have a way of rising to that occasion.
Wow. And I just want to commend you too. I mean, your vision of a nonpartisan church, not even bipartisan, but nonpartisan or multi-partisan church, where people who normally wouldn't have dinner together can worship together. And perhaps as a result of worshiping together, might be able to have dinner together one day. That's a really cool vision, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I have a feeling that the marriage supper of the Lamb, that's going to be a really big table, by the way.
Yeah.
And there are going to be some people around that table that we might be a little bit surprised by. So we might as well leverage our tables now in the same kind of way that table is going to look someday.
Well, thank you for being so transparent, and thank you for being so open. I think that really helped a lot of leaders, Mark, because this is stuff everybody's working through, right? There are no passes on this. Like at the highest levels, at every level, if you're just starting a church, if there are 19 people or if there's 19,000, it's just complicated right now. So thanks for just opening your heart, your playbook on that. And I think you did give some really good advice along the way. You got a brand new book, and it's being released just in time for a brand new year. It's called Win the Day, and it's about stressing less and accomplishing more. So it's like, how would you describe it? What is the book about? I was trying to put it into words, and I'm like, I wonder how Mark would phrase that. So it's not time management. It's way more complex than that, or broader than that. So what would you say the book's about?
Well, in my preaching and writing, I always look for organizing metaphors. And usually those are stories. I love history. I wanted to teach history. I love science. So often my stories kind of come from that angle. Part of why I like doing that, Carey, is because I love pastors, and pastors need illustrations.
Yeah. Well, and you don't recycle the ones, like I've read most of your books. I think maybe all. And like, I'm reading this one, you gave me an advanced manuscript, and I'm like, I've never heard of that. I've never heard of that. I've never heard of that. Like, you're pretty good. But for those watching on YouTube, you'll see why. Look behind Mark. Okay. So how many books in your study right now?
Yeah,
what do you have approximately?
Well, I read 3,000 books before I wrote one. So, you'll love this. We may have even talked about this one time, but I heard this study that the average author puts about 2 years into a book. Yeah. So I figured if I read 250 books a year, I could pick up 500 years of life experience and only be a year older. And so I actually, in the early years of ministry, I was reading 250 books a year. And Carey, no one believes me, but I was pastoring 19 people. I had some time on my hands. So when people ask me how old I am, I often tell them I'm about, now I might be 9,000 years old in book years.
So, and you take really good notes. We've talked about that. We'll link to all the old episodes too, because it's a lot of fun.
So I didn't even answer your question though, did I?
What's the book about?
Win the Day.
How would you describe it?
Well, so I pulled an old Sir William Osler was the father of modern medicine, and he gave this speech at Yale University in 1913. It's a brilliant speech. I've found the original copy and read it, and in that speech, he talked about living in day-tight compartments. He said you have to bury dead yesterdays. You have to not worry too much about unborn tomorrows. You have to live one day at a time. And so that's kind of that opening story about, I don't care what goal you're going after. I don't care what problem you're trying to solve. I don't care what habit you're trying to build. I know exactly how you need to do it. You have to do it one day at a time. You have to win the day, whether you're training for a marathon, trying to get out of debt, or trying to write a book. It happens one day at a time. So that kind of is that opening story.
How did you manage time as a young leader? Like when you read 250 books a day, but I imagine, a couple of decades into leadership, your approach to time management has morphed over the years. And so what was your natural default approach, and then how have you changed it?
Yeah. Carey, I love talking to you. You're such a good question asker. And because we're friends, I feel like I can riff a little bit.
You can riff all you want, man.
I'm wearing a ring with infrared sensors that Laura got for me that tells me how much deep sleep, my respiration rate, kind of all of these biometrics every morning.
What ring is that?
This one's called an Aura ring.
Okay, that's what Pat Gesslinger, who you wouldn't know, I don't think, who's also a guest. You're the second podcast guest in like a short window to show me the ring. So I got to get a ring for Christmas. Okay.
So we're giving some people some birthday and Christmas ideas, and so every day it gives me a readiness score. And part of why I'm saying this is I want to start here. In fact, in the book, I talk about the genius of this Genesis rhythm to life. In the Jewish culture, the day doesn't start at sunrise. It starts at sundown the night before. And so a good day starts with a good night's sleep. So I felt like I needed to just put that on the record.
Yep.
Because here's what I'm about to say. I read a book in seminary about D.L. Moody, and it said that he felt a little twinge of guilt if he heard the blacksmith up hammering before he was up studying scripture. Now listen, I think there's probably a little bit of legalism there. You don't need to feel bad if you're not the first person up. But I read that story, Carey, and it impacted me. And then I had a father-in-law that planted and pastored a church for 3 decades, Calvary Church in Naperville, Illinois. And he grew up on a farm, and I saw how he would get up and he would be praying by 5 a.m. every morning. And I'm actually more, my circadian rhythm in my early years was bent more towards night owl than lark. But I knew that if I was going to pastor and write books. If I was going to try to do kind of two callings at the same time, I'd have to get up awfully early in the morning. So my short answer is when people ask me how to write a book, I tell them you got to set your alarm early in the morning, or there is a way to do it late at night. But one way or the other, so much of it comes back to time management. But there again, I would remind us, we're spending 2 hours and 22 minutes on social media, and some of you are above average, okay? And so, Carey, just an hour a day, you buy back half of that time. I mean, everybody could write a book. Everybody could train for a marathon. It's amazing how much we could accomplish if we were a little bit more proactive in managing our time. And now I feel kind of funny because I'm talking to the guy who came and spoke to our staff about time management, and I actually told you had to turn it into a book, and now I'm flipping this on you, but you're doing
great.
it.
You got yours out sooner. But we were saying before we started recording too, and thank you for that. That was a real challenge for me. Those of you who graduated from the High Impact Leader, that was Mark Batterson's idea. He's like, you got to turn this content. I wrote a brand new talk for your staff, and you're like, this got to be something, and it'll be a book. I think it's September 4th or 7th, 2021. It's coming out. It's the new pub date for the book, the yet to be titled book.
Sign me up, because
you're signed up.
Our staff was talking about that for months, and you need to, with time management, you need to keep coming back to it, because you have to keep working on it.
You find that too, right? It's constant adjustments.
It really is. And the thing that amazes me, Carey, and I kind of get into this in the middle of the book, that most of us live such unevaluated lives. Like we don't even think about our morning routine, or how much time we might be wasting, or how much we could leverage if we put it to the right purpose. It does take discipline, but wow, I got
to ask you about that ring then. Because you're monitoring deep sleep. So anybody who follows me on Instagram knows it's a bit of an obsession for me for the last couple of years, and I'll post my sleep rings. I just use my Apple Watch and an app called Auto Sleep, but you're tracking it differently. What have you learned about sleep patterns? How much deep sleep is optimal? What helps you sleep deeper at night? I'm fascinated by all these things.
Yeah, a couple of quick answers. One is going and getting a puppy 2 weeks ago, my sleep scores have plummeted. So Laura and I went and picked up the cutest little 4-pound cockapoo. Wow. And she's the newest member of our family, and we love her to death. But she is interrupting the sleep cycle, to say the least. But that's that aside.
Prior to that, what were you learning?
I think the big thing is the screen time before bed is a huge factor. Laura's much better at this than I am. She even has the blue light glasses that can kind of help. But temperature is a big deal.
Cooler,
you got it cooler. And that might be subjective in some sense, but
mine is 63 degrees Fahrenheit. What's your ideal temperature?
Oh my goodness. Then you are, you might, you're in Canada, aren't you?
I am. I guess we are, but we love our summers here, and we actually get a summer. Do you have a range that you like to keep it at? I'm getting super nerdy here.
High 60s is
high
good
60s,
for me.
67, 68. Yeah.
And I hope, I don't want to get in trouble saying this, but we actually, we invested quite a bit of time trying to find the right mattress. Now, this was after 20 years of marriage.
I know. And you live with hand-me-downs and whatever else you can find.
Yep.
Yeah. No, we did that a couple years ago too. What did you learn?
Yeah, well, we learned that the first two weren't the right fit, and we finally went to a third one. And but there again, Carey, it's like, do you like hard or soft mattress? There's so many different. The technology behind them is absolutely fascinating to me. You've got to find something that and you have to try it for a couple of months. And fortunately, props to the mattress companies. I mean, they have pretty generous policies as it relates to trial and error. And so I think it's worth trying that out. And this is things I never thought I would be talking about.
No, I know.
But
you know, one of the things that contributed to my burnout was lack of sleep. And years ago, I heard, you know, from somebody, and everybody's on a limited budget, but, you know, you spend a third of your life sleeping, invest in a mattress. And people are always thinking, what is the lowest amount of money I can pay for this? Meanwhile, you've got this like 60-inch plasma that you blew a whole bunch of money on, you know, and that's going to be, you know, probably at some recycling place in 2 years, 3 years. So we took that more seriously. And then shoes are another thing. As a speaker who's on the road a lot pre-COVID, I started investing not in crazy shoes, but like $150, $200 shoes. And when your feet aren't on fire at the end of the day after being on your feet for 16 hours, 17 hours, it feels good. Yep. So I'm with you.
Yeah.
So you found a good mattress. And what is a good night's sleep for you these days? Like how much deep sleep can you get?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of nights where I'm still working on that, trying to figure out, because there are nights where I'm at 30 to 45 minutes. And I know people are listening and thinking that's a so little deep sleep. But really, if you get an hour and a half of deep sleep, you're actually in kind of a positive territory of because there's REM and there's all these different sleep cycles. The one thing I would add to that is your psychology before bed. And this is part of the brilliance of the Bible, you know, like don't let the sun go down on your anger, for example. Our emotional state before bed has a lot to do with how we're going to sleep. And this is me like opening up the closet door to Mark Batterson and putting things out there that I might laugh at myself after the fact, but
well, I'll laugh with you because I'm fascinated by this stuff too, because it makes such a difference to my performance. Like, I bring my brain to my job, right? And my heart. That's it. Yeah. And if I'm exhausted, I do horribly at this stuff.
Yeah. So here is the here's the closet door. I am uber competitive. Now, part of this is I played basketball in college. But I hate losing. I didn't like losing Candyland to my kids. And so I love football, Carey. And so during the football season, with Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, let's just say that my sleep cycles aren't as good. And I came across this study one time that said that fans of losing teams experience a 20% drop in testosterone the next day.
Wow.
And so, but Carey, I think I'm above average, which means I probably experience like a 40% drop. If my team loses like Monday Night Football, sometimes I will not have a good night's sleep. And then if they do win, I got all this adrenaline surging, so I don't sleep good then either. So
man,
what I'm saying is I'm a little messed up.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, that's such a gift. Mark, this is such a fun conversation. Thanks for being so transparent. I really appreciate it. So sleep's important. Burying Dead Yesterdays. Walk us through the frame of the book. I hope people will go get it. It's a fascinating book. It's one that only you could write. You have such a distinct style. And, you know, every once in a while you get the hackneyed, you know, you buy a book, it's got these 3 stories you've heard before. I don't think I'd heard a single story, analogy, historical reference prior to reading Win the Day. But walk us through the framework and how it can help leaders, and really ultimately how it's helped you, Mark.
Yeah. Well, you know, yesterday is history, tomorrow's mystery. So why don't we just go ahead and win the day? You know, in a nutshell, that's the elevator speech. But part 1 is about burying dead yesterdays. You can't be fully present in the present if you've got all of these past issues that function as baggage in your life. And you do have to imagine unborn tomorrows. That's kind of the 3rd section. And then right in the middle is where we do the hard work of win the day. And so, Carey, I divided it into 7 habits, 7 daily habits. And these are pretty fun. I mean, we won't have time to talk about all of them.
No, but pick a couple of your favorites, or maybe one from each section. The Bury Dead Yesterdays, Win the Day, and Seize Unborn Tomorrows.
Yeah. I'll kind of throw them out rapid fire, and then I do have a few favorites. So Flip the Script and Kiss the Wave are that first section. By the way, Kiss the Wave, some people will recognize that because it's a Charles Spurgeon allusion. He said you have to kiss the wave that throws you against the rock of ages. And by the way, in that chapter, I tell the story of Laura's battle with cancer that, really that was our focus for a couple of years. How do we fight this thing? And she came across this one little question in a poem that said, "What have you come to teach me?" That approach, Carey, to cancer, that approach to COVID, that approach to all of the problems and challenges we face is so critical. That's how you kiss the waves. So,
in other words, embrace your suffering, right? Embrace the pain you don't want to face.
Yep. And it's the only way we're going to grow through it. And then Win the Day, I talk about Eat the Frog and Fly the Kite, which have some fun with. And then Imagine Unborn Tomorrows, we talk about Cut the Rope and Wind the Clock. Wind the Clock, I had so much fun. Because
tell us about that one if you had a lot of fun with it. Well,
I mean, Carey, if you go see the doctor, how does the doctor discern your chronological age? He does it, there's only one way. He asks you how old you are. He asks you what your birthday is.
I was looking for a really complicated answer on that.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not like you're a tree that has a certain number of rings that can be counted. There's a study in there by Ellen Langer, who is kind of famous for mindfulness. That's sort of her terminology. But wow, there's a story in there that about the way that you can grow younger as you grow older. I want to live to 100. Now, the funny thing is, I'm not sure I'm a great candidate because I had asthma for 40 years before God healed me. I had ruptured intestines that almost killed me at 30. And I have 2 ACL reconstructions from my basketball days. So I'm like a walking hospital. I really I want to die young at a ripe old age. And so that part of the book, I think, is going to be a challenge to readers that maybe have taken a few more trips around the sun. And you are not past your prime. You do not age out in the kingdom of God. You cannot read the Bible and tell me that God doesn't love people using people who are, 85-year-old Caleb's and 100-year-old Abraham's. And so I know that your listeners kind of are all across the range, a lot of young leaders. And listen, your youthfulness doesn't disqualify you either. God said to Jeremiah, do not say, I am too young. Don't say it. No, God loves using us despite what we think are the things that disqualify us.
Well, that leads to a really interesting question because you've been doing what you are doing at the same place with the same people for 25 years. Similar story here. And at this stage of life, I feel younger at 55 than I did at 35, at least to some extent in my body some days because I'm in better shape, but mentally as well. And I hope that continues. What has kept you fresh and engaged? Because a lot of people, this is how they do it. It's like, well, I was here for 5 years, then I moved on, went somewhere, was there for 7 years, then I renewed myself. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but like to stay in the same place with the same people, in the same environment, and feel continually renewed and optimistic and have fresh ideas, that's a special skill set. How do you do that? What are some of the habits that you've cultivated that lead to that, Mark?
I think I have about 3 different answers to that.
Go for it.
One is I'm always mindful, Carey, that every pastor is an interim pastor. So I want to put that out there up front that I don't care if you pastor a church for 50 years. I started young enough that in some form or fashion, I won't be the lead pastor past a certain age because I don't think that's maybe being fair to our church. But I have a pretty good shot at 50 years at this thing because we started so young. But I'm always cognizant of the fact that I am an interim pastor, and so that is part of my mindset. But I really believe in that long obedience in the same direction. Nietzsche, but of course Eugene Peterson popularized it for a lot of pastors. And so you let your roots grow deep, and you trust that God is going to produce fruit. You overestimate what you can do in a year or two, underestimate what God can do in 10 or 20. And so, I look back now, and you have to play the long game. We are not trying to build a church. We're trying to bless a city. We're trying to do things that'll make a difference 70 years from now. Why? Because that's our theology of the city. It's Jeremiah 29, seek the peace and prosperity of the city, plant gardens, build houses. God knew that they would be there for 70 years, the Jewish people as exiles in Babylon. We need that same mindset. And so I think there's something about that, Carey, that keeps you young. I think without a vision, the people perish. Yeah. I think you age quicker if you don't have a vision that you're going after. And so we've got some God-sized visions that, we have a city block right now that we bought it for $29 million. We put another $20 million into it. We aren't doing that for us. But God's vision for this church is bigger than ours. And so when you invest yourself in something that's bigger and longer than you are, somehow it really keeps you young. You don't age out. And then I've got 100 life goals, and some of those are going to take a long time to accomplish.
Can you give us a sneak peek of one or two that you've accomplished and maybe one or two that's left of those 100 life goals?
Yeah, it's funny when God healed my asthma, and I share that story in the book. 40 years, severe asthmatic, and I prayed a brave prayer. God answered. I think I'm at 1,435 days inhaler free. I count the days because each day is miraculous to me. And so I went out and ran the Chicago Marathon to celebrate that miracle. And so some of them are physical, like hiking the Grand Canyon rim to rim with my oldest son, Parker, or rafting the Colorado River with my youngest son, Josiah. Some are financial. We want to give back to National Community Church more than we made in salary. And that, part of that is possible because of the writing piece. But we as a church, we want to give set a goal that we would give 25 million in missions. We've actually given 20 million over the last 17 years. So we're going to need to up that financial goal. So some are physical, some are financial, a lot are relational. Why set a goal, Carey, of going to the top of the Eiffel Tower when you can set a goal of kissing your wife on top of the Eiffel Tower? Now that's a little bit better, isn't it? So
that is a way better goal.
So those 100 life goals we're making available to readers of the book. In fact, there's a link in the book, but I'm going to put that on my website. I'm a big believer in life goals that you won't accomplish 100% of the goals you don't set. And so I've begged, borrowed, and stolen a few goals from other people and adapted them, put my fingerprint on them. And so I think one of the great outcomes of this book, thinking about imagining unborn tomorrows would be if I could help some people maybe come up with 10, 20, 50, 100 life goals. I think it keeps us young. That would be worth the price of the book alone, to get some goals and some vision. And I think you're right. It goes into a just cause and a mission that's bigger than you are. When you become the mission, it's time to get a new mission. It's just not exciting enough, for me. Yeah,
and,
no doubt.
And I see that in you. Mark, I know we talked about this briefly on the Church Pulse Weekly show. You did a couple episodes with David Kinnaman and I, but I want to get your sense, because it's really quite memorable to me, about, where the future is going. For leadership, for the church, for in-person events. So as we're recording this, have you reopened physically any of your locations yet?
We have not.
No.
We have not.
And do you have a date on the calendar or not yet?
we're eyeing 2021. We are not legally able to gather because Washington, D.C. is still on lockdown. And then, Carey, we just we got some news about some movie theaters closing indefinitely, which affects 5 of our campuses and our ability. We may not relaunch where we last gathered. So everything is up in the air for us right now. And it's crazy because the peace that passes understanding somehow is guarding my heart and
You're
mind.
not panicking, are you? We
no,
talked
not
a bunch.
At all.
You're not.
And I think it's because we've seen God close doors and then open other doors so many times in our history that just there's almost this implicit trust that we want to see how this is going to play out. But yeah, I would say so everything's still up in the air for us. I did a 2-day silent retreat, and this is something I might advocate for. There's so much white noise. We need a little bit of ear cleansing, especially as leaders. And so on that silent retreat, the Lord really spoke a few things to me. I think one is I really felt once again, and obviously, I've written a book on prayer, The Circle Maker. I did a prayer circle, 4.7 miles in 96. We now own 6 properties worth about $75 million. We own them debt free on that prayer circle, Carey. I mean, it's just an absolute miracle. So it's not like I haven't been into prayer. God's saying, double down. And I felt like the Lord said, if you'll turn National Community Church into a house of prayer, I'll turn it into a house of healing, a house of miracles, a house of reconciliation for all people. And so we're wow. We have a couple hundred people weekday mornings gathering what we call the upper Zoom. If you had told me at the beginning of the year that we would have hundreds of people at 7:14 a.m. gathering to pray day in and day out, I would have said revival broke out. Well, no, COVID broke out.
Yeah.
But maybe revival is breaking out. And so then the one other big shift is this realization that if we're relying on the weekend, we're in trouble. And so, in some ways, I feel like our Dream Center, we've served 50,000 meals during this COVID season. And some, we had 30 missions trips that we weren't able to take physically. And so there are certainly things we haven't been able to do. But one shift that we made this fall was, if you add up 52 messages, 52 weekends times a 30-minute sermon, that's only 26 hours. That's not going to get us where we need to go. And so we launched NCC Daily, which is a podcast. It's a 5-minute kind of quick hit Monday to Friday. And the idea is pretty simple. The only ceiling on our intimacy with God and impact on the world is daily spiritual disciplines. And so I feel like our job is to help people practice those spiritual disciplines. And Carey, you know this better than about anybody I know, that it's so easy for people to go to church, check a box, and check out Monday to Friday.
Yep.
And God is decentralizing his church. I think he's reminding us that we're the priesthood of believers, we're the company of prophets.
Yeah.
And he's raising up a remnant, and he's activating the gifts of the Spirit, and he's moving in ways that I've not witnessed. And part of it is that I'm meeting more and more people like me that feel this daily dependence on being Spirit-filled and Spirit-led. And so maybe God has us right where he wants us.
I know it's almost an unanswerable question because you don't even know when you're going to be allowed to reopen. Nobody knows where the virus is going. We all thought it'd be gone by now. It's not, blah, blah, blah. But when you reimagine NCC in the future, what will be the same and what will be different as it sits right now?
Well, I don't, well, our online campus I know is forever. Yeah. We've seen the significance. I think we've had 362 raised hands, people making a decision to follow Christ. Wow. And we've become more intentional on that front at helping people take that step of faith as we've gone to this more socially distanced approach to church. And so In some ways, we'll continue to leverage technology and do it more effectively. I do think that the pendulum will swing back, and people, the day will come when you can maybe at least fist bump. I don't know. Maybe we won't even do that. Maybe it will be still the distance waving, but people are craving it. We miss being together. And I'm finding that we brought our staff together. Not all of our staff, but we probably had 35 of our staff in a room together this week, which is the most staff we've had in the same place outside of a Zoom call in about 6 months. It was electric. It was like, wow, it's amazing. There aren't as many people, but the best churches are what percentage of people are coming back to the churches that are crushing it?
Yeah, 60% is sort of the top end of what I hear.
Yep.
And it's generally the return to church these days is somewhere between 20 and 60%. Maybe I think I heard 70%, but
yeah. And so my question is, will we ever get back to that 100% or 110?
Yeah.
In other words, when do we get back to the place where we're growing? Because people are afraid to go into any environment. Not everybody, but a lot of people are afraid of going into an uncontrolled environment, especially an environment they haven't been into. And so if our only metric for success is weekend numbers, that's what needs to flip. And we've got to think in different categories. And you've been so great at coaching so many of us as it relates to engagement and how do we think in different categories and what does success look like. And we've always felt like that's more measured by how are we giving to missions? How are we caring for the poor in our city? Yeah. Well, guess what? Those numbers have gone up. In fact, beyond our regular giving this year, we created a relief fund to help people that are really hard hit, people that have lost a job, people that have been impacted, as well as other churches, because some churches are really struggling. Yeah. Our people, above and beyond their regular giving, have given almost $500,000. I think we're just a little bit south of $500,000 that our people have given above and beyond normal giving that we've been able to then redistribute, which Carey, I mean, that's sounding a lot like Acts 2, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where, I've been so blessed by the generosity of our congregation. And that's coming out of a capital campaign for this city block that we've been building. But I think we've tried to cultivate that kind of culture that really celebrates generosity.
You've had a lot of fun too midweek doing that daily devotional on Instagram and the daily podcast. And last week we were mailing back and forth and you're like, what gear if I'm going to do a podcast studio? So I gave you my list and here we are talking a week later. You got your mic, your boom arm, you're all set up. You're going pro, dude.
Oh man. I'm just trying to keep up with the Nieuwhofs.
Oh, come on. But it's great. So you're going to be way more online than you used to be. Will you moving forward? Tell us what's behind that and what you have in mind.
Well, when COVID hit, I started posting these 2-minute messages on Twitter and Instagram, and they became like this lifeline for people. And they were being watched by tens of thousands of people. And I'm thinking, okay, that seems to be effective or working. And it's discerning what works, what doesn't work. And I know all of us have experienced some Zoom fatigue, but the reality is some meetings are more effective in that context. There's some things you don't need to fly there for. Yeah. And so I'll give a good example, Carey, because both of us are authors and we often do kind of a book tour. Well, I don't think I'm going to be doing a lot of physical travel for Win the Day, but I'm going to do a virtual tour. And so if there is a staff or a team or a book club or a church that wants to read through Win the Day, hey, let me pop on a Zoom call for a half an hour. You pick which one of those 7 habits, or you tell me, hey, what are you wrestling with? And let's leverage technology. All
right, get ready. Here they come.
Yeah. And so, it's just kind of taking a slightly different trajectory. Because for me, it's the travel that's the wear and tear. You know, I put a boundary in place a couple of years ago where I don't do more than 7 overnight speaking trips a year. And that's because of the demands of pastoring the church. But Zoom, I think, is going to allow me, I can do this tour. I can be in Timbuktu tomorrow.
Yeah,
you know?
totally can.
Yep.
And I just want to say to leaders listening to, like Mark and I've had that conversation, I think on this podcast before, about the limits that you put on in your travel. And I always understood that and respected it. Craig Groeschel, very similar. I think his number might be 12. If that's off, it's not that far off, where he just doesn't do a lot of overnights. And I always respected that, but I allowed travel creep to get into my life. And COVID shut that down. And now I'm like, oh, I love my old life, but this is better. And so I think when things open up again, I will probably have similar boundaries. And part of that is trade-off, right? Like if you think even on the Sunday morning matrix, we already knew, and I'd love your comment on this, that, at least half of NCC wasn't actually in the building on any given Sunday morning, even on your peak Sundays, right? You knew that. Like you could have a full house, but half the people who call NCC home weren't there. They were at the lake. They were visiting family. They slept in. They lost track of time, whatever. Traffic got in the way. They just didn't make it to church. And the same with travel. You're trading time. You can only be in one place at one time for a set amount. If I do a course, I can help a lot of people. We did this webinar that got over 12,000 people to it, which is like insane. And I didn't leave my house. And so digital just allows the amplification of ministry in a way that physical ministry doesn't. Physical ministry is here to stay. People will always be in church. You're always going to be in the room. But I think the impact, like you say, for those little Instagram videos, and if you follow Mark on social, those are not high production things. Those are you and your iPhone just riffing for 2 minutes daily.
Yep. And I love it. One of my favorite parts of Win the Day, I talk about doing the math. And that's kind of what you're doing, Carey. We need to be a little bit, we need to have better arithmetic. And I'll give leaders an example. And this is how I have Jedi mind tricked myself. I have hard time saying no to anybody. So if someone asks for a meeting with me for 30 minutes, that's 30 minutes times one person. And that's important. There's tremendous value in one-on-one meetings. But I know that on any given weekend, if I'm preaching a 30-minute message to thousands of people, I've done the math, it equals 72 days. That's 2.5 months of time. And so I've got to make sure that I'm prioritizing my study time so that I'm not wasting 72 days of time. Another example is writing. When I'm in a writing season, I don't take outside meetings. I lock down with writing retreats on the beginning and the end. Our teaching team does more of the lifting. And part of that is like the Circle Maker, for example. If you take the number of copies sold times 5 hours as an average reading time, it's well over a millennium. So Carey, what I do is I do the math and I kind of trick myself. And so there's a little part of the book where I talk about, if you want the days to count the days. And I would also say count the minutes, count the hours, because I think everybody that's listening right now, you would be surprised at what you could accomplish if you simply reallocated a set amount of time and were disciplined with it, and leverage a few tactics like habit stacking, leverage a few tactics like morning rituals. You start to do a few things like that, and now you're not just trying to win the lottery. Now you're winning the day, and you add it up, and it's going to make a difference in a year or 2 or 10.
It's so good because we talk about that on our team too, Mark. And it's like, are you going to speak to? So here's the AB scenario: speak to 1,000 people or 100 leaders. I would pick 100 leaders, day in and day out. Because let's just assume those leaders are all leading 100 people. So 100 leaders leading 100 people. You've influenced 10,000 people, not 1,000 people. And leaders are probably more likely the kind of audience that will multiply whatever you invested in them. So that's similar thinking?
I love it. And that, wow, you just nailed it. And Carey, you're living it because you are, there are pastors of pastors and there are leaders of leaders. And I just want to say this. I've said it to you privately, but your podcast has been a lifeline for me. In fact, I jokingly said before we went on the air that we've taken a lot of really long runs together that usually, because your podcasts are long form, if I'm going on a long run or on a long bike, I listen. The only problem is you don't help my pace. And I'll tell you why. Because I actually have to then take notes on my phone. So you slow me down.
Well, if you
Carey,
make it to 100, you can thank one of the 2.5 hour episodes I did. Okay. It was like that extra run gave me the extra year. So
yes, I love it.
It's such a joy. And honestly, like, I don't know, this is time number 5 or 6 for you on the show. But like we said before we started recording, the joy for me is we meet you at a whole other place in the journey. You're so transparent. I know even that first half hour of this episode where we talked about the pressures of a hyper-partisan culture and how you deal with that, to like nerdy stuff like sleep and the impact that makes and the things you don't know. I just know that encourages and refreshes a lot of leaders. So the book is called Win the Day. I'm very excited for it. Instead of a special website, obviously Amazon, wherever you buy your books, but is there anything in particular you want to draw leaders' attention to as they access that?
Yeah, if they just go to markbatterson.com, there's a little page for Win the Day, right. And there'll be kind of there's a download there for 7 steps to setting life goals, and as well as my list of 100 life goals, Carey, because I like sharing those kinds of things as just a little added bonus.
Well, that's amazing. Mark, you're a gift. So grateful for you and Laura. Thank you for investing so much in leaders today, and really appreciate our friendship and your leadership in my life. Thank you.
Well, right back at you. God bless.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at careynieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at careynieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.